This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. At Trident, they are more than just coffee. They are storytellers. It's crafted by veterans. Their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself, because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew coffee today and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee. You're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Use promo code DTD15 for 15% off your order. Hey guys, welcome back to the DTD podcast, Dynamic Tales Delivered. Recently, I went to Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg, whatever you want to call it. I talked to a couple of guys, and that episode was so successful with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Lucas that I had him back into the studio so we can kind of hear his entire story. It's amazing. 27 years in the military, almost exclusively in special operations. So please welcome into the studio, Dave Lucas. What's going on?
How you doing, DJ? Good to see you.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad you're here. I came down there, I had a look around and got to come to the graduation, talk to you guys, talk to your command sergeant major, and I learned a lot down there that I didn't know. And then talking to you, I was even more interested in your kind of background, because you not only are special operations, but you come from a family of special operations. So like we always do, can we kind of talk about real quickly your growing up in a special operations family with a father that was in that, and then what it kind of meant for your career?
Sure. I actually wasn't a military brat. My dad got out before I was born. He was in college in Texas after high school, and decided that he wanted a little something more. And this is during the early 60s. I won't say how early, but there was no war going on. I'll say that. And so he came home and told his parents that, hey, I'm dropping out of college and I want to go be a paratrooper. And then while he was in jump school down at then Fort Benning, went and Special Forces recruiter came in, and I believe it was him and one other guy were there at the end of that briefing. So very much like a movie script. And then he went through the course. So today we call those guys 18 X-rays that join right in and come right in. And so he did that as a young private, and then went through the course out at Camp McCall, where we still hold it today, and then was assigned to what was then Alpha Company, 10th Special Forces Group over in Bad Tolz, Germany. And now it's a whole battalion. It's 1st Battalion's out there, but back then it was only a company. And he was actually, Vietnam was TDY at that point. It was 6-month TDY trips, and was on schedule to go there. But instead of going there, he actually, after a few years, got out, decided he needed to finish college, and actually went to West Point after being in 10th Group, and made it by, I think, 1 month, because you cannot hit your 22nd birthday. And he started about 3 to 4 weeks prior to his 22nd birthday. So very similar to kind of my path, not by design, at least by myself, but more of a coincidence.
Well, I want to ask you, a lot of the guys that I talk to that are on the show that have family that was either in Vietnam or with special operations, a lot of them tell me that their family never really talked about it. Their dad never really talked about it. Was that what you kind of found growing up too?
It was kind of always there. Like we knew about it, and my dad was very proud, having been to West Point. He did go to Vietnam after he graduated, and went to Ranger School in, I think he was class of 669, I believe. So 1969, and then left shortly thereafter and went and did a year in Vietnam as an infantry platoon leader, and then came back. And so while he was, and then I had asked him later, I said, hey, why'd you get out? You were doing well. You're a Ranger, you're Special Forces, and you've done all these things, 12 months of combat in Vietnam. And he said, well, at that point in the military, I'd kind of done everything there that I had wanted to do. And so decided to go on to the next challenge. And so for me, it was always there. We used to go over, I remember watching my cousins live not too far away when I was growing up, and Army Navy game, always a big day in my house. My parents, big Army fans. So coming up here soon in I think it's December 14th in Washington D.C. And so it was always there, always very proud. We talked about it a little bit, but he is I think like most of like a lot of people that we served with, very humble about it, and just kind of matter of fact, like, yes, it's something that I did, and very proud of it, but not what he would lead with. And obviously, it's given us a lot to talk about over the years, especially once the war started. It's been great to have somebody in your family that really understands and the things you're involved in, the type of people, the culture, and all that. So it's been great.
Any other family members that had a military life or had aspirations to be military?
Well, yes, absolutely. Both of my grandfathers served in World War II. My paternal grandfather went over, did his time. He was actually too old at the time, and so they put him into the transportation corps. He had to fight to go because he was much older. He was in his 40s at that point, and so was significantly older than a lot of the 20-year-olds that were going in. And so he was a transportation corps over in Europe. And meanwhile, my paternal grandfather was an infantry officer and came in after D-Day and was not in D-Day, but came in and then drove all the way to Germany and rising through the ranks as he went. And he retired, came back, and he ended up retiring out of the reserves as a major general and commanded the 77th Infantry Division out of New York prior to him retiring. So military is always, I think, like a lot of families and a lot of people that serve, it's always it's one of those things that's kind of passed down, and it was never a pressure put on me. In fact, just the opposite. I came home as a teenager. I was 18, about to turn 19, right after graduating high school, and came home and said, "Hey, I want to join the Army." My mother cried, and my dad said, "Okay," and then told me all the reasons I shouldn't join, and I asked him later. I said, "Why did you tell me that?" And he said, "It's not something that you should go into." He said, "I didn't want you to go in with rose-colored glasses. I wanted you to really know what it was like." This is all prior to the global war on terror, so we weren't at war at that point. But something that I always felt a calling to do, and I had never discussed it really with my parents, so I think it was a bit of a shock. I think my mom's almost accepted it, but it's almost 3 decades later, so she's been a trooper for sure, especially over the last 20 plus years.
Brothers, sisters, anything like that growing up?
Nope. No, I was the only one out of my siblings. I'm one of 4 kids, and actually that's not true. I'm sorry. My younger sister joined, but she was injured within basic training, and so so her service wasn't too long, but it still counts, and she raised her hand and went out there. So I was very proud of her.
Well, it's interesting, though, that you talk about your dad telling you he doesn't want you to go in with rose-colored glasses. And quite frankly, at the time you joined is the same time I was in, was a peacetime army. It almost makes me think that there's maybe a little bit of do you think there was a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth from the military?
No, not at all. Once I signed and joined and was in, he was very happy. I think when you can't go through something like the Vietnam War as an infantryman or really anywhere. And I think you gotta when it's your child, it's different. I now look at my son and my daughter, and my son's 16, and so it's a very real possibility. And so I've kind of taken the same method with him. As obviously it's much more present now, being he's grown up a military brat his entire life, but it's nothing that I've ever pushed on him. And he asked me if I wanted him to, and I said, I think it would be great if you serve, but don't do it for me, do it for you, and do it for the right reasons, because if you, depending on what you do, and even regardless of what you do, you can find yourself in some pretty dicey circumstances. And it's one thing when it's your brother, your friend, or anybody, but when it's your child, I think at least for me, it's a whole other ball game. So especially when you know what to expect on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. My daughter's in college right now, my oldest, and she just joined. She's in ROTC to commission there, but she joined the National Guard while she was in. So she's doing both right now, National Guard and ROTC. So it is different, and she's looking at it as it's a career afterwards. And I don't think it's ever really pushed with her either. I mean, both her mom and I were in the military, but it's never been really a thing. And so it's good to see Because I think we're rotating back to a generation now that wants to start serving again. I think we got in there for a couple years where people didn't want to be first responders, people didn't want to be military, and I think we're starting to kind of roll back the other way. Do you kind of agree with that?
I hope so. I hope so. And thanks to you and your wife and your daughter for serving and for y'all for raising somebody that wants to serve. I think that's a bit of a challenge nowadays with, everybody knows that we have our recruiting challenges. And so that is, it's important to raise children and adults, as they become adults that want to serve. And if nobody chooses to serve our country, then we're going to be in a lot worse circumstances. So, but I think that it's really important to do that and to talk about the benefits of serving with your children. And, and for us, I told my son, I said, it doesn't need to be in the military if you want to, but I think it's important to serve. You can go do a mission trip to, somewhere with the church or something like that. But just the idea of putting something before yourself, I think is very, very important. But of course, I would be very proud if he chose to, if he came home and said, hey, I want to go do this. I would be as proud. I don't know if I'd be more proud or more nervous, but all of the same. And especially now with dealing with a lot of the recruits that we get in that come into our pipeline now. Some of them are not, they're only a few years older than my son, which is a really unique perspective and one that I didn't anticipate because I haven't been around young soldiers for a very long time. So it's given me something else to think about since I've been in my current job now.
So let me ask you, with what you just said about it doesn't have to be in the military. You can serve, you can do a mission trip, you can do all different kinds of things. I want to pose a word to you, and I want to see exactly what your thoughts on it are. And the word is sacrifice.
Well, it's something that I think that our generation is much like many other generations that come before us, but not, I don't think a generation probably since our parents has had to sacrifice as much. And specifically with folks within the military, it's definitely taken on a lot. Over the years, it's changed for me for sure. I think that, as a young soldier, when I was single, it never felt like a sacrifice. It felt like I was having a great time doing an awesome job with my best friends. And then when I was married, the first time I deployed, and that was rough, but it was something that we signed up together. But really, when I had children and had to say goodbye to them, and then they became aware, is where I think the latter part of my career, even though the hottest parts of the war are behind us, being gone from them and them knowing about sacrifice, I think it's built into the cake for them because they've never known anything but. However, it's taken on a stronger meaning for me watching them go through it and just what the family has sacrificed when you really stop to think about it, which I don't think we do often, but, it's something that if nobody's willing to do it, then, we're going to be in a bad way. And so it doesn't, yes, we've sacrificed, but so has everybody that served. And honestly, I feel like I've gotten more from the military than the military has taken from me. And so at the end of the day, I don't even know if I can describe my own service as sacrifice other than, time with the family. But, just because I feel like I've gotten so much out of it. Does that make any sense?
No, it does. But it makes me ask you the question then. If you say that you don't really look at it as a sacrifice other than being away from your family, so who do you think sacrifices more, you or the family?
Oh, they do, for sure, without a doubt. Because at the end of the day, I'm the one that raised my hand and I'm the one that has asked them first with my wife and then with my son and then my daughter. And they have no choice in this lifestyle. They have no choice when dad leaves. And, I have continued to seek out job after job after job, which puts me in the situations in which I would have to be gone. They didn't ask for that. They weren't part of the discussion. It was between my wife and I and always has been. But now that they are getting older, they're more of a part of the conversation now. So I think hands down they do because they just don't get a vote. It's something that's been voted onto them without their consent.
How do you make it up to them at the end? Or even, I guess, how do you make it up to them while you're doing it?
I think the best way they know that they're my priority, and which is odd, for people that travel a lot and are gone a lot. My daughter's 9, and I think she's got 4 or 5 deployments under her belt, and she's only 9. So it's something that what I do is try to, when I'm home, I'm home. I'm not working when I'm home. I'm not doing anything. I spend time with the family, and my wife and I have always prioritized time with the family. And so we really, really make the time to spend together, like, as much as we can, much to my teenager's chagrin now. But, he wants to go hang out with his buddies, but, we reserve at least one day on the weekend for family time and go out, go for a hike, have a picnic, spend time together, spent Friday night this weekend playing life with the family. So we really prioritize that as much as possible, and really truly being here, because especially for years and years and years where the turn was constant, when we were home, it was that we really prioritized, and that time was so precious, because if we weren't training to get ready to go back overseas, then we were doing something else. And so the time that we had together, we just made the most of it. And it's something that, even as the operational tempo has slowed down a little bit, it's something that we've maintained that throughout the years. And so we've been really lucky, and my wife and I have been on the same page, which really goes a long way to living a life like this and coming out the other side whole.
So what do you think goes wrong then because in law enforcement, first responders, military, there's a lot of divorce. The divorce rate is very high, especially in the job that you were doing. Where do you think that people go wrong then in their careers to where you're not on the same sheet of music?
I can't speak to anybody else, but I'll tell you the thing that I think that has made us successful within our marriage, and I do consider it successful, because my wife and I, we set aside time, and we still enjoy being together, all these years later. And what has worked for us is communication. Even when, it's funny, we talk to our kids, our kids don't know a world without cell phones. They talk of the olden days, when phones were on walls and not in cars. And we say, that wasn't too long ago. But when I was deployed, my first deployment ended up being a year. We did not know it was going to be a year. It was an emergency deployment. My brigade from 10th Mountain was sent over to Iraq in 2004. There was the infrastructure over there was very was spotty at best, and we had the little Nokia cell phones that never worked or anything like that. And so my wife and I only spoke about once a month at that point. Sometimes I could get on a phone in like a phone bank and have an actual real phone call, but a lot of times they actually had field phones that were, Army field phones with a hand mic that you could call back to. For me, it was Fort Drum, and they somehow had it connected. And then I told them the number, and then they called my wife's cell phone number. And so I had to actually break squelch to talk to her. We did that a whole lot. And I had, before that deployment, I had seen, like on the History Channel, a story about a couple, and the soldier, the husband, had written a wife a letter every day that he was gone for World War II, which was however long. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna see if I can do that. And I ended up being able to do that. And so she's got, sometimes I'd write twice a day, and it'd be a simple like, hey, I'm doing well, just want to know I'm thinking about you, and throw it in the mail. And so I had the foresight to number those. And so she's got about 400 and some odd letters sitting in a box somewhere that our great grandchildren may read through at some point. But I tell that story because it was cathartic for me. I didn't realize it, but now looking back on it, I think it was cathartic. And she has always been good about, we can talk about things. Obviously, we won't get into a lot of specifics on a lot of things, but she's very understanding. And so I guess to sum up the whole thing, it's really communicating and being on the same page. Every decision we make, no matter how big or small, outside of normal day-to-day stuff, we do it as a team. And that goes a long way, especially when you're not on the same continent for months or years at a time. And so just being able to maintain that communication has been absolutely critical over the years.
And so let's talk about the first year that you go in, because you're not married right when you go in. You're a single guy. So let's talk about the year you go in and kind of your outlook on your career at that point.
Well, I like to say that, at this point, I enlisted for 3 years, 27 years ago. and with no plan whatsoever on staying in. Like I said, I graduated high school that early in the spring, early summer of '96. I came home in that fall. I had been thinking about it, and I was kind of working, saving some money. I was planning on going to college, but I just didn't feel like college was what I wanted to do. So I came home, had the conversation I alluded to earlier, told my parents, I said, hey, I've decided I've gone and seen a recruiter, and I'm joining the Army as an infantryman. And my mom, who had lived through Vietnam with my dad and everything, she immediately started crying, and my dad and I talked, and so she made me promise to wait till after Christmas, and then my birthday's in January. She says, well, wait till after my birthday, and her birthday is also at the end of January. And I said, okay. And then finally I said, hey, look, I see what you're doing. Yeah, you keep asking me to kick the can down the road. And I said, I'm leaving after your birthday. And so I did. So in February '96, I shipped out and started the process. But my goal was just to go in, kind of test myself and do something, have an adventure, really, as I think a lot of young men want to do. And I actually did not sign up. I did not have a Ranger contract when I went in. All I'd heard my entire life was how difficult Ranger school was, and of course it was Ranger school in the '60s, so a little bit different. And so I said I'll go in first, and I'll go in as a paratrooper and try that and see see how I do. And then once I got in, I really enjoyed it and did decently well. And so I said, you know what, I can do this. And so I ended up getting what was then called a RIP contract to go into the Ranger Regiment as when I was in jump school. And so where my dad volunteered for Special Forces in jump school, I volunteered for the Ranger Regiment. And then so began definitely the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life up to that point, and which is assignment to the 75th Ranger Regiment. But also, it was the hardest, but also the best.
What battalion are you assigned to?
I was in 1st Battalion out of Hunter Army Airfield down in Savannah, Georgia. So not a rough place to live as a 19-year-old teenager.
Once again, you talk about you're in the Ranger Regiment. You didn't just go active duty and you have your weekends and stuff. It's a whole different world when you're doing that. Even before we're at war, it's a whole different world to live in. I've had a couple guys before the war that have been on the show that talk about it. It's a constant, every day. It's kind of a job interview being in that. So you're not just living the easy life in the active service. When you go there and you see that kind of life, is there any kind of spark in you that says, yeah, this might be something that I'll do forever? Because as we talked about when you came in, there really wasn't. You were like, I'm going to kind of challenge myself and then we'll go from there.
I really enjoyed it. I loved it, and you hit the nail on the head. It was not an easy life, especially as a young private back then before going to Ranger school. It was challenging for sure. It was great. I mean, I still am friends, of course, with guys that I served with then, people that I know have gone on, and I had 4-star generals that came out of that time, command sergeants, major, all over the place in every unit you can imagine. And so it was great. And I really did enjoy it, but I also knew I wanted to go to college. And so I stuck to my timeline and I served 3 years and ended up getting out in January of 2000. And so at that point, but it wasn't. I'd been out for about 6 weeks, and I really started to miss it. And so that's where that's where the bug really started the itch. Started to scratch it was after I'd gotten out, because I'd seen really the type of people that I got to serve with, and just they just really were the best, and got to do tough training in a just incredible organization with phenomenal leaders, and travel all around the world. I'd been deployed to Korea, to Thailand, spent about 6 weeks over in Thailand. I went to Germany, and it was great, all before my 21st birthday. And it was, like I said, prior to the war starting. So it was just great. And once I left that, and I was a Ranger fire team leader on a Friday, I ETS'd, I got out, I drove home to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I started at a community college on Monday. And so I was in like Psych 101 with a couple people that I'd gone to high school with, fresh out of the Ranger Regiment. So you talk about a culture shock. nowadays there's all these transition programs. There's all sorts of, this side or the other that are all great. But back then, I remember it. I still have it. When I went to get my DD 214, one, I didn't even know what that was. I went down to some lady on Hunter Army Airfield who had a typewriter, and she said, "Hey, show me all your awards and schools," which of course wasn't that many. So she typed it up, pulled it out, and handed it to me, and goes, "Congratulations, you're out of the Army." And that was it. And so I said, okay. And I went and packed up my stuff, and I drove from Savannah to Knoxville. So it was, I still had, back then we had high and tights and Ranger Regiment. So I still had a sweet high and tight that I had gotten a week ago when I showed up to community college on Monday. So yeah, pretty big culture shock.
Well, let's talk about that. I kind of want to know what you're feeling, because like we've said so many times so far, is that this wasn't the goal. The goal was just to go in and kind of test yourself. And then you see this whole new world, and you see so many things that the other guys, like you said, that you went to high school with, that you're in community college with. You've seen a whole different world. You've seen a whole different kind of definition to sacrifice and to family and to brotherhood and all these things. And then you go to college and you see, quite frankly, some shitheads that are going off, dad's money, or they're just screwing off until they can figure out what they want to do with their life. I kind of want to know what you're feeling when you go from such a high level and intensity to almost dead stop slow motion.
That's you're not too far off, I think. Well, that is where, like I said, that's where the itch really started. And I was like, man, I went so far, and I kid you not, I was still young. I turned 22 a week after I started college, and so I was still very young, very naive, and just wanted adventure, because we hadn't gone to war, we hadn't done the things that we trained to do. It was great, but as a young soldier, especially as a young Ranger, like, that is what you are waiting for. And so I did everything. I looked into all sorts of stuff. Hell, I even looked into the French Foreign Legion. I was like, well, maybe I can go do that and go, continue this adventure. And then I ended up talking with a friend of mine. So I'd shown up in January, started that semester, talked to a friend of mine who had been in 175 with me. And he said, hey, I'm down in Florida. And my plan was always to go to Florida State. And I said, hey, he told me about the 20th Special Forces Group down in Florida. And I said, hey, you can go to the Q course and become a Green Beret. And then, while you're going to college, you have to take time off to go to the Q course. But I was like, man, that sounds great. And so I did. So I drove down in March. So I had only been out 2.5 months. I drove down to Ocala, Florida, and went down and interviewed with the guard unit down there. And they said, yeah, we'll take you. And so I packed up, and 3 months later, in June 6th, I moved. I packed up a box van, and I drove down to Tallahassee and started school there, and then went to my first drill with Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 20th Group down in Ocala, Florida. And it was great to be back around guys, and that, very like-minded and whatnot, but I still was going to college. So it was that best of both worlds. And I really enjoyed it. And in fact, at my very first drill down in Ocala, I ran into a good friend of mine who had been in 175 with me. And actually we had gone to Ranger school together. So I very quickly found my future roommate in college. And so we moved in together a few months later, and it was great.
So let me ask you, so the difference when you're in community college and when you go down to Florida, do you feel different? And what I mean, do you physically, mentally feel different when you're in community college where you're at? And then when you go down there, you hook back up with your Ranger buddies, you get a roommate, you get back into that lifestyle. You're getting ready, just like you said, you're training up for a deployment, or you're going on a deployment. You're almost in that cycle now where you're training up to go the Q course and to be part of this. Do you physically feel different? Do you mentally feel different?
I was happy, that's for sure. And then I started training again. Like, I always exercised, but I started training, rucking, doing all the things because now I had a goal. And I discovered, I didn't realize this probably as much when I was younger, but not unlike probably most guys in this profession, I'm pretty goal oriented. And so I said, okay, hey, I'm going to go to SFAS and go to selection. And then I'm going to come back. I don't want a girlfriend, like a steady girlfriend or anything, and because I don't want to change my plan, and so yeah, I did feel differently, and just because it was great to be back in it, I was still meeting my goal of getting my education and using my GI Bill, and was having a great time in class. I was learning, but I was also still I was back with the people that I enjoyed being with, and iron sharpens iron, and that's a real thing. When your parents tell you when you're young, you are who you hang out with, and that is absolutely true. So surrounding myself with those guys that I was fortunate enough to work with, and then to live with. All of my roommates that eventually became we're all SF Rangers, and I had a Marine, and we all kind of gravitated towards each other, and just had a great time. And we had our fair share of fun too. It was college, so it was a hell of a lot of fun. But we were also training up. Of course, everything changed the next year. Things got a lot more serious. But at that point, we were having fun, and hey, let's go do this and continue on. So yeah, it was great.
Well, when you were in that unit at the time, was Sean Keenan there with you?
Yes, yeah,
You know what he's doing now, right?
I do not. I do not. I know he became the unit sergeant major.
He is down in Florida. He's retired now. But he has a mezcal company now. He just got back from Mexico, where he was working with the mezcaleros, doing his own bottling and all of his own agave and stuff. He was invited to live with them while they were bottling up his first batch.
Oh wow, that I haven't talked to him in a very long time, but that checks out. I believe that. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, he's got real long curly hair now. He's a surfer guy, and he's loving life right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is great. And we still share a lot of mutual friends, and it's been fun to see folks that serve there. Obviously, a lot has happened since that time, but yeah, there were a lot of great guys down there, and I was very fortunate.
Well, you talked about the next year everything changed. I've had a lot of guys on the show, and we've said it a bunch of times, where they say September 10th and September 12th were two very separate days. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on it too, because like you said, you're in college, you've got a goal of going back in, being an officer, being a Green Beret, but the world kind of changed at that moment. And I would say almost down to the cellular level, the world changed at that moment. How does your goals change from then? Because you found out in the civilian world, it's okay, but I'd rather be there. Now you really have a chance to be there.
Well, there's a couple things. I'll get back to September 10th, but there's a couple really large things that changed my perspective on September 10th and as well that happened. So remember earlier I said, one of my goals was to not have a steady girlfriend and not get tied down. That lasted a few months, and then I met my wife, and that was it. I was that went out the window. What the saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, right? And so I said, okay, all right, I can handle that. But I talked to her. I said, hey, I'm still going. I went to SFAS in the spring of 2001, and most kids go to the beach, college spring break and all that stuff. I went to Camp McCall, North Carolina, and that's how I spent at least a month of my time. And I actually got med dropped right at the end, and I'd gotten really sick, and so they were great. It destroyed me. I was so upset, but they said, hey, you can come back, go home, get healthy, and you can come right back. And so I didn't have a cooling off period, so I said, okay. So I came home, went to the next drill a month or two later, whatever it was. But my company commander and company sergeant major brought myself and my roommates, the guy that had been in that we'd graduated Ranger School together in 175. They bring us into their office, and I was like what's going on here? And they sat us down and they said, hey, we've only got, I think it was 2 captains in the company. There should be 7, one on each team and a company XO. And they said, we want you guys to go get commissioned and then come back and be detachment commanders. And I was like, absolutely not. I have no desire to be an officer. I was like, talk to somebody else. And I, in the way that only a sergeant major can, I was told to stop being a selfish son of a bitch and think about the unit. And and I said, well, that's ironic coming from you as an NCO. I was like, Sergeant Major, I don't want to be an officer. I just want to be on a team. And so anyway, I relented, but I said, look, I'll go join ROTC because they wanted us to go to OCS, which would take us out for a year. And I said, look, I don't want to go do that. Let me join ROTC, make me an ADC on a team. So as an assistant detachment commander, like let me be on a team so I can learn from one of the captains that are there now. We had some great officers and NCOs. I said, let me learn how to be on a team and be a captain. And they said, they relented and they said, okay, we'll do that. And then I actually looked this up not too long ago. I signed my ROTC contract on August 1st of 2000. And when you sign an ROTC contract, and it was for the reserves, it was a reserve contract so I could remain in the Guard. And when you sign that, it is the exact same. It is an enlistment contract just for as an officer. But that also, which when I signed it wasn't a big deal, but 12 days later, it became a very big deal. It made me non-deployable. So now back to your original question, how did I feel? Well, I was engaged because I had fallen head over heels in love with this girl I was never going to date and commit to. And so of course I proposed and she accepted. And then now I was going to be an officer and then up and we're at war. And my wife and I were actually together. We had driven to school that morning when the first plane hit the tower, the first tower. And I remember telling her, we didn't know anything. We were listening on the radio. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have anything. And I said, man, we were listening to some shock jocks. I said, if that's a joke, that's a really sick joke because there are a lot of people in those towers. So shut the radio off. We go to class. We actually linked up. We were in the library. They came in, during our second period. They came in and said, school is canceled. America's under attack. Everybody go home. And we're like, holy cow. And so we get back in the car. We're driving back and going back to my house. And both towers had fallen and all the things of that morning. And, we like all other Americans were just stunned. And so we were just glued to the TV. And very shortly, so you asked what the feeling was on September 12th. For me, like a lot of us, it was, I wanted to be a part of the response. I knew I wouldn't be a part of the initial response, but I went to my my ROTC commander and I said, I am going to fight this war and either release me from my contract today or allow me to revoke my reserve contract and sign an active duty one. And during that time period, I actually went to go see, shortly thereafter, I went to go see a recruiter with my then fiance. And I couldn't enlist because I had signed that ROTC contract. So then I went to talk to my commander and said, hey, like, you've got to let me do this. And he did. And so I revoked my reserve contract for active duty because I wanted to be a part of the response. And then I graduated as quickly as I could so I could go and take part in the subsequent response after the attacks.
So what year do you graduate then? 2003?
2003. Graduated a semester early because I just loaded up my classes so I could, because I didn't want to miss the war. Turns out I could have waited another semester, but I
I think you could have slowed down.
It wasn't going anywhere, but I wouldn't change a thing. Everything's been phenomenal. But yeah, so.
Yeah, so you go to drum though after that. So you're still Ranger qualified, but you go to Big Army. So let's talk about going to Big Army instead of that small band of brothers like you were used to from your first active duty, and then pretty much from your reserve time too.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I ran into my very first day in Fort Drum when I went in to sign into the unit and then check out to go get my family taken care of on permissive TDY. I found myself standing on this corner walking back to my car, and there was a very angry looking captain with a combat scroll and two mustard stains on his jump wings, and a guy named Aaron. And so I salute, Rangers lead the way, sir. And so I introduced myself and I said, hey, I at that point, 3 years earlier, had been in 175 and he had been in 3rd Battalion, and he and I struck up a conversation, and then he said, hey, come back to my office. So, yes, sir. So we went back to his office, and I was an artilleryman. So was he. And he had been a fire support officer in 3rd Ranger Battalion. jumped into Afghanistan, jumped into Iraq. So probably one of the most combat experienced captains in the Army at that time, and just a great guy. And so he took this poor second lieutenant back to his office, and he ended up calling down to the Ranger Regimental fire support officer, who was a warrant officer at the time. And he said, "Hey, I've got this lieutenant here. You need to bring him back to the regiment. He's a prior service guy." And so I spoke with the Ranger Regiment, and they were like, "Hey, when do you want to come to what was then ROPE, which is the Ranger Orientation Program?" And I said, "Chief, I will be there tomorrow if you tell me." And he said, "Okay, on Monday." This is Friday. He said, "On Monday."
Did you think about maybe discussing it with your wife?
Absolutely not.
Like, even
this is Fort Drum in 2004 when we had driven into Watertown, New York. I don't know if you've ever been there, but at that point, when we drove in, it's much nicer now from what I hear. But when we drove into the town, she started crying. So and she's not a big crier at all. And so I was the hero. I got to come home and I said, "Hey, I think I just got hired to the Ranger Regiment, at least the opportunity to go try out." And I said, "We're going to talk on Monday, and like I can go to ROPE in 2 weeks." And she was all about getting out of Watertown, New York. So no issues there. We were aligned, and so yeah, it was great. Total happenstance, but I'd rather be lucky than good. Luckily, I ran into Aaron, and turns out it would be the first of many times that we would run into each other over the years. But we had he really helped me out. I thought I was destined to head back as a brand new second lieutenant back to the Ranger Regiment, but it didn't quite work out that way.
So let's talk about that then, because you got your hopes up, your wife's ready to go, you're all on board, you're going to be back with that life, and then it doesn't happen, and you actually deploy with the 10th Mountain.
That's right. Well, so like I said, that was a Friday. I went home. I'm flying high over the weekend. On Sunday evening, I get a phone call from my battalion FSO, and he said, "Hey, I know you just got here, but I need you to come in tomorrow morning. And like your permissive TDY is canceled. You got to come in." I was like, "Oh, what's going on, sir?" He said, "Well, we just got emergency deployment orders to Iraq." And we were actually supposed to leave for Afghanistan early the next year in February. Back then, they were 6-month deployments to Afghanistan. And he said, "Hey, come in tomorrow, but we don't know when we're leaving. We don't know where we're going, and we don't know how long we're going to be gone." And so, yes, sir. So I walked in that Sunday evening. I remember my wife was unpacking some boxes in our room because we had just shown up. And I was like, "So," I told her, and we were both just kind of stunned. And so then I got the honor and the opportunity to deploy with the 10th Mountain Division into Baghdad. And this was all in a response to the Mahdi Army uprising under Muqtada al-Sadr in Baghdad and down in the Shia population down in southern Iraq. So we were kind of walking into a mess.
Before we get into that, I can just imagine in my head the conversation. "Hey, remember how we talked about moving? Not only are we not moving, but you're going to be here by yourself."
One of us is moving, but yeah. Yeah. And she did not stay there. She actually went and moved in with my parents down in Tennessee, just because my wife grew up a lot. Her dad was in the Navy. And so she grew up, she had lived in the Philippines and Hawaii for a long time, always at the beach. So the prospect of a 8-month or 9-month long winter with 15 feet of snow was not something that she was excited about. So, which I can't blame her.
No, not at all. So let's talk about, you deploy in. It's your first combat rotation. You're an officer. I guess you're embedded with the Foxtrots, right? At that time, because you're a fire support officer. So is that who you're with as a second lieutenant?
So I was in an infantry company, and so I was a company FSO, and then I had 13 Foxes. The forward observers were down in each platoon, and then I was attached at the hip with my company commander, a great commander, a guy named Paul Volke, who unfortunately died in Afghanistan in 2011, but a great guy.
So as you deploy into Iraq, it's your first time. You're an officer. You're in charge of people. This is a completely different world than you've ever seen. And as you stated, it's not the greatest time to deploy into Iraq. So Let's talk about, as you touch down there, I want to talk about emotions, feelings, thoughts as you're getting into this. And then we kind of circle back around to that sacrifice thing. Like, for so long, you've wanted to do this, to sacrifice yourself. Now it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it, and this plays into the feeling for I think probably everybody in our brigade. They did not tell us how long we were going to be gone because frankly they didn't know, and they said, "Hey, plan on 24 months," because nobody thought that the war was going to go on for as long as it did. But they said plan on 24, but 36 may be a possibility, but we'll keep everybody informed. And so that day in June of '04, when I said goodbye to my wife, I kissed her goodbye, and I said, well, I'll see you when I see you. And I was like, well, that can't be the last thing I say to my wife in person. So of course I said, I love you. And then I got on the bus, and that up to that point was the single hardest thing I had ever had to do in my life. I didn't know what I was going into. I didn't know, I'd seen Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, all the things taking place, watched the invasion in '03, all of those things. But obviously I'd never been to Iraq personally. So I didn't have a clue on what to expect. I'd never been to the Middle East before. It's kind of funny now, I haven't been able to say that for a very long time. But at that point, as big of a piece of my life as the Middle East has been over the last 20 years, I at that point, I'd never been. And so it was definitely terrifying, and for me, the biggest thing was I just didn't want to let anybody down. And because you don't know how you're going to react. You don't activate a brigade and send them on an emergency deployment because things are going well. So things were obviously going very poorly, and it was very tough on the folks that were over there at that time. And so that's what we were walking into. And so when we got there, we spent a few weeks, getting up there and doing everything. And because this was all unplanned, we got word and deployed in under a month. And so, 10th Mountain's not a rapid, especially when you're not ready to go. It's not a rapid deployment organization. And so, or at least we weren't at that point, we weren't staged and prepped and ready to go. So, I just did not want to let anybody down. And, I wanted with my family having served in every war, for several generations, I just wanted to kind of, I wanted to be worthy and not let anybody down. Most importantly, the people that I was serving with, my infantry company that I was with. And there were several guys. In fact, my unit had already been to Afghanistan previously. And so there were some guys with some real, that had been in Operation Anaconda and other things with 10th Mountain. And so some guys with some really good combat experience. And so, you just, at the end of the day, you hope that you are able to do your job and do it when it counts and when it's when other people need you to do it. And so yeah, that was probably the biggest thing. And of course I miss my wife. I missed her terribly. But when you're out and you're actually doing your job and you're doing those things, like, I think I know for me, I'm not thinking about her when I'm out and I'm actually, conducting an operation or doing something like that. When I'm back and I'm in my room and I have those down times, that's when I can allow my mind to drift back. And so, we didn't know how long we were going to be gone. So you can't put that mark in the wall and do a countdown when you have nothing you're counting down to. We did not find out we were going home until I want to say within 2 weeks of when we actually went home. We had no idea. They just kept saying, hey, we'll tell you. We don't know yet. We don't know. And that was a time where you had units that had started to go back, or people were starting to get extended. People, you had the one unit in, I think it was Alaska, where they went home and actually turned around and had to fly back and went back into combat. And so I think the command just did not want to put something out, get everybody's hopes up, and then have to change it. And so they waited until the very last second to tell us when we were going home. If you don't have something that you're working towards, then you just kind of take it one day at a time. And that's what I did. And I think that's what a lot of guys did.
Well, you say the word terrified. And I wonder, though, what are you terrified from? Are you terrified from letting your unit down, not being able to be with your wife, being scared of dying? What is it? Or is it a combination of all those things?
It was, I wasn't scared with my wife. She knew. In fact, after 9/11, when I decided to come back on active duty, like I said earlier, we were engaged, and I actually gave her the opportunity to break our engagement, because I said, hey, look, I'm going to go fight this war. I don't know where it's going to lead. If you don't want to go through this, like you didn't sign up for this. And I totally get that. I said, so if you would like to give me the ring back, I hope you don't. I won't hold it against you. I understand. And she said, hey, I said yes. And I knew what I was, I knew the possibility. And she said, now is that time. I was very relieved, but I knew that we were in a good place. And so that was, you could not design a better partner for anything, much less for this lifestyle. But to the other two, yes, I was terrified. I didn't want to let my team down, especially as a leader. But I think just nobody wants to let their team down. And then I was absolutely, not in the moment, but when you're flying over, the 20 hours or 30 hours, whatever it takes, and you're going into war for the first time, you don't know what to expect. Anybody that says that they're not worried about getting killed or wounded badly is probably lying. And that was definitely something that I think all of us thought about, because nobody knew what we were going into. And like I said, we weren't going because things were going really well. We knew we were going into things were getting worse over there, and we just didn't know how much. And so, yeah, before you've been to combat, it's one thing to deploy and know that there's a possibility. It's a whole. I think it's a different thing when you deploy and you know that it's coming, and you don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know the form, the shape, or where and when, or what it's going to look like, but you know that it is coming towards you, and you just hope you're not found wanting. So
what's so incredible about that whole statement that you just said to me is that you were engaged. You didn't want to be engaged, but you got engaged. That was your plan, was, hey, I'm not going to be engaged. I'm not going to be held down. Then you get engaged. Then you go active duty. Then you're going to go back to the Ranger Battalion, but you get held at Fort Drum. But let's even go back even further than that to the 9/11, where you tell your wife, I love you, but I love to do this more. I don't know if I'd say I love my country more than you, that's what you were saying, but you were willing to lose this partner just to be part of this. And that's incredible to me. This episode brought to you by Max Belts. Guys, are you looking for a perfect accessory to wear every single day for every single scenario? Well, you've come to the right place. We all know that nothing stands up to wear and tear like a good leather belt. If you're looking for the toughest leather belt on earth, then you've come to the right place. Max Belts. They're handcrafted in the USA by veterans who are serious about their craft. And if you're looking for a belt that's tough enough for your active lifestyle and help support those who've given so much to our country, look no further than Max Belts. It's the toughest belt on the planet. It's a perfect solution for casual or dress wear and ideal for utility and firearm carry. It's the highest caliber of American craftsmanship, and it also positively impacts our military charity partners. Once again, Max Belts, you can't go wrong with them. I wear them every day. They're the toughest belt on earth. And you can find all of this and so much more at maxbelts.com.
And it was more, I don't know, honestly, I've never really thought too much about it over the years. And like I said, once she said yes, I never brought it up again. I didn't want to give her a second bite of the apple, but I think it was more, I loved her so much, I didn't want to potentially make her a widow. I didn't want her to go through, whatever was going to come, and I didn't want to put her through that. And she stiffened her spine and said, no, we're in this together. And we were married in the summer of 2002. And then, man, I don't know if you had forecasted everything that's happened over the last 22 years, I don't know if she still would have said yes, but I'm glad she did. So yeah, it's been great.
Well, but to even take it a step further, like you just said, you didn't want to make her a widow. The thing to me is that you told her, because I think you would agree with me, a lot of people would take the other way around that. Well, I don't want to lose her, and I could possibly die doing this, so let me just stay this route with her. Your goals were so idealistic and so much bigger picture That's just incredible to me at that age.
You know, you served and your wife served. Your daughter is serving now in the Guard, and will when she gets commissioned. I think it's just something, and especially after 9/11, we were so united as a country, and to have the ability to partake in, the only word that comes to mind is vengeance for what happened to us and for the almost 3,000 people we lost on that day in such a brutal attack. It was something that I had to do no matter what. And it wasn't even, I never even gave a second thought to doing anything else. I had the opportunity, I had the ability, and I had the capability to go and be part of that vengeance that everybody was looking for, and a few people were able to go and partake in. And, is that the reason that you should go? Maybe not, but at that point, when I revoked my reserve contract, when I went in, I was pissed, and I wanted to go and hold those people accountable. Things have happened over the years, but it was obviously the only thing that's been on par with that is Pearl Harbor, for our grandparents' generation. And I just couldn't imagine not serving and not going to do that, given where I was and what I was doing and my background and all that up to that point. I never really gave it a second thought. It was just, that was going to happen, and there was nothing that was going to stop me from doing it. So
let me ask you though, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Do you think at that point, because we're talking at the very beginning of all these deployments, you think you hated the people that you were about to go fight? Do you think you hated the entire place? Because before you go into combat, before you see the ins and outs of it, the minutia of it, the smaller things, everybody is the same. You're going to a country to, as you said, exact revenge for the United States. Do you think that you hated that entire area when you went there the first time?
No, I distinctly remember, and I did not. Actually, when I deployed to Iraq, I was, whether this is accurate or not, I'm sure now in retrospect, they probably didn't feel this way, but I felt that I was going to help the Iraqi people. And can't say I felt the same at the end, 12 months later, but that's when we really started going down. The insurgency became very strong. A lot happened during that year, and not just to me, but throughout the war, right? We had, Fallujah, we had, all sorts of really large battles, and IEDs really started taking off. The first EFP started showing up. IRGC and the Iranians really started ramping up their operations because they had Americans next door, and they had ready militias. And so the militias started getting formed. And so Iraq, when I left, was very, very different than when I came in. And so when I came in, it was former regime elements and then the Shia militias, specifically Muqtada al-Sadr and the Mahdi army and those guys who had formed up and we were doing battle against. And then it morphed over time. So then we had our Sunni insurgents, then we had our Shia, and we had the Iranians helping them, and we had all of those things. And so the Iraq that I left was very different than the one that I showed up to.
Well, I'll pose that question to you at the end of that deployment. Yeah. Do you think you hated the region when you left?
Hate, probably. I don't think I hated anything. I did not have, there was no part of me that wanted to help at that point. After losing people and seeing the things that we had seen over the year and everything that had happened, my good attitude and desire to help the Iraqi people was not present. And so I don't think I hated them, but I definitely was not a fan because there were still enough. I knew enough good people there. I had a lot of interpreters that were local nationals that were really, really good people that I worked with and went through some very, very tough times with. And so there was one point, so I spent 6 months of that deployment as a fire support officer. And then I spent the last 6 months as a platoon leader they had reflagged my artillery battalion into an infantry role. And so they put me over as a platoon leader. So, and we lived for a significant part of that time. I lived out at this little platoon fire base in the middle of Baghdad by ourselves. And so I really got to know the area, the local, a lot of the people around there. And we kind of patrolled that area and kept that safe, or attempted to varying degrees of success. So I got to know a lot of people there. So I don't think I can say yes, but I can definitely say my my heart was not there at that point I didn't want to help a whole lot of people at that point, if I'm being brutally honest.
Do you remember when you got there? Do you remember the sights, the sounds, the smells? Do you remember the first time stepping off the plane?
I don't think anybody can forget it. It was the hottest I had ever been. And, you know, Saddam, when we came in, we made the mistake of shutting down the entire government. You know, the debathification was going on. When I first got there was no Iraqi army. There was no Iraqi command. It was still the coalition provisional authority. And so we were the only law and order. And of course we had foolishly disbanded all the military and the police and all that. And so so I say all that because you mentioned the smell. Well, there was also no trash pickup. And so, you know, anybody that's walked those streets and you know, it's not something that's great. And we got there in the summertime. And so very hot, very, you know, the sewers, the plumbing, you know, all that's not exactly great. And then you didn't have trash. You had trash piling up, and it was pretty bad as far as the sights and smells and everything. But it was definitely like stepping off. Like I said, I had never been to the Middle East before. So it was a culture shock in more way than one, for sure. I absolutely remember that.
Do you remember your best day there?
The day I left, it was incredible. I was so grateful to be alive, and my unit was actually already gone, and we had done our change out with a unit from, I want to say, New Hampshire National Guard, I believe. And it's been a few years, so forgive my fading memory, but I was the officer in charge. I was running the ground portion of our relief in place, and then my S3 was running the staff. During that time, my entire battalion had redeployed to Kuwait to stage to get ready to go. So they'd packed up my stuff and were gone. During that last day, we had gone out, and we weren't out of the gate for 10 minutes, and we got hit with an IED. And I was just like, holy cow, man. Like, I'm going to die on my last day, literally, like at last hours. Like, my wife is going to be so pissed. And so, because everybody else is already out of country. And so it was pretty eventful. We got hit with an IED. We captured some guys. We went and did a raid. We did all sorts of stuff. And then I flew back, I went back and linked up with the S3. And, you know, I got a photo when I left. I was like, I want to get a picture to kind of memorialize my last day in Iraq. What I thought was my last day. I've never been so wrong about anything in my life.
Well, you know what? I would, with everything you've told me so far, I would beg to differ that you haven't been wrong about other things.
That was a very bad call. I don't gamble, and the reason why is probably obvious. And but yeah, I legitimately thought I would never be back, and I was absolutely elated to leave and to be able to go home and see my wife. That was awesome.
Worst day.
There were, as you would imagine, there were a lot. But you know, I would say anytime we lose an American is the worst, and that never gets easier, nor should it. And that is what takes a toll on I think on people is you know, all the other stuff is too, but seeing your own countrymen, your own people, your friends wounded, killed, all that. I mean, hands down. You know, unfortunately.
You know, I asked that question because I can look back in 18, I'm almost on 20 years of law enforcement, and I can look back and I can pick a couple different days, but I know the day in my mind that was like the worst, where I was like, what in the, is this day ever going to fucking end? I really thought that. So I like to ask that question. What's the worst day where you're just like, man, can the sun just come up tomorrow and let's start this all over again?
Yeah, I can't say I wanted to start over again, but it's, you know, it's one of those things. I definitely, like, when I was out there, especially as a platoon leader, we were out every day, and we were, you know, out patrolling our area, you know, looking for IEDs, you know, doing all that stuff. And so we get blasted all the time, and whether it was IEDs, whether it was VBIDs, you know, whatever that was. And so I didn't realize it, but it wasn't exactly hard to see. But my nerves were just shot after being there for a year, and I was a very different person when I came home than I was when I left. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was very, very tired and was ready to come home and kind of this the stress of combat is bad enough. The stress of not knowing is bad enough. But then when you very much are responsible for other people's lives, that's an added stressor and pressure on you that every leader knows that's ever been to war. And so there's nothing you can do about a lot of circumstances. However, that doesn't make the pressure any less. And so having that constant pressure, it's not, it's nothing that millions of other people haven't felt before, but it was a heavy burden for sure. It is a heavy burden. Anytime you purport to lead, America's sons or daughters into combat, you have been given the responsibility to do your best to make sure that they come home. Of course, some of that is out of your hands, but it is still something that is not something to be taken lightly.
Did you sleep okay over there? You said you were very tired. Do you think you slept well? Or even let's talk about when you got back, did you sleep well?
I didn't. I think when I was there, actually, I know when I was there, I just kind of shut down in large part. I think you have to just on a day-to-day basis when you're out there. There's a certain part of you that just starts to shut down because you can't see the things that you see. You can't do the things you have to do and internalize. Well, not internalize it. You can't tend to spend too much time thinking about it and ruminating on it and whatnot. You just kind of block it off and put it away. And so, but when you're not in it, when you're, to your question, when I came home, I don't know if I had if sleep, like, frankly, I just don't remember if sleep was an issue, but I know that I was exhausted and mentally and physically. And then, and I had back then I came home and like I was back in Iraq about 7 months later. So I'll say that. But during that entire time, it took me a good 6 months before I couldn't drive underneath an overpass or past like a pile on the side of the road, which luckily America is pretty clean. So there's not too many, but like I couldn't drive past something like that without getting a chill down my spine and like whole body shivers. And I knew intellectually that there was nothing there because I was in America, but it was just it was a response that I had not had when I was in country, but when I came home. And it was really frustrating because it was the only time I physically could not control my body. And it wasn't anything like, wasn't making me drive off the road, but it was something, it was a physical response that I did not, that I couldn't control. And it ebbed over time just in time for me to go back to Iraq. So, but that's another story.
Well, I think that we need to, I understand that you deployed right back, but I think we need to talk as you start turning your career into the Green Beret, into all of the other things that you've done. What makes you go from that? Because we've talked about you being in combat. We've talked about what happened when you came back and the resets. You have to know that when you choose that lifestyle, when you go into special operations, especially in the time, the GWOT that you were in, you're going to do that even more often. So do you talk to yourself? What is it that happens that makes you go, this is what I want to do. And I know I want to do this for the rest of my career.
My goal was to go back to the Ranger Regiment. I had always wanted to, probably not unsurprisingly, I always wanted to go to war with the Rangers. And so I had stayed in contact with them while I was deployed, and I came back and I took about 48 hours on the ground at Fort Drum. I left 2 weeks of leave with my wife, and I checked in from that leave into rope at Fort Benning. And so I started right then and there. And, I got to my board, and I knew one of the sergeant major that was on the board. I had known him previously. We'd served together, and I was very lucky. I was very committed. I'd done enough to get to that point. And then I remember they said, "Hey, you just got home, right?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I don't remember who the president of the board was. I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "How long ago? When did you get home?" And I said, I looked at my watch, and it's 1 month ago today. And they were like, "What the hell are you doing here?" Because it was we were about 2.5 weeks into it. And I said, "Because I want to go to war with the Rangers." And he said, "All right, you're hired." And something to that effect. So my board was less than 5 minutes long, thankfully. And I think they just saw a young officer, a young Ranger who wanted to go and get after it. And, my wife, again, being you know, being the saint that she is, I came home from being gone for a year and said, "Hey, let's go take a vacation. We'll take a couple weeks, and then I'm going to go there." And then I probably sold it as that'll get us out of drum pretty quickly. And so she was all about that. And so she actually came down and visited me one weekend while I was there. But yeah, I was there immediately after coming back. The very next rope class, like I said, 2 weeks later, and I wanted to be a part of that. I think I think the Ranger Regiment is a phenomenal organization, and so I wanted to be a part of it and part of its history by going to war with the Rangers, and I was afforded that opportunity.
So when you go to war with the Rangers, once again, we go back to the same question. It's different than Big Army. You're back in that world, and it's not an easy world to live in. I would think that in wartime and in a combat zone, it's even more difficult to live in that world.
It had and still has, I will say. Actually, one of a friend of mine that was, we were in the same company. He'd been a platoon leader and then became my company XO, is now the Ranger Regimental Commander. So that tells you how long ago it was, but it was laser focused. Like I think all units should be. It was, at that point we were deploying every 6 months. We were doing 3 months on, 6 months off. And it was, you knew that you were going back into war at most 6 months later. And so we were just, they had just come off a very difficult deployment. Several guys had been killed. One of the first things that I did when I got to 375 was we did a memorial service for several Rangers that had died in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so it was a place of, and it still is, but when I got there, it was highly mission focused. It was extremely combat experienced. My company, I was in Charlie Company 375, had done multiple combat jumps in both Iraq and Afghanistan. They were the ones that on October 19th in 2001, when the nation watched the parachute assault into Objective Rhino in Afghanistan, that was my company and elements of other people too. But, it was very, very combat experience at that point. And so I felt like I was where I had always wanted to be, with true professionals that, everybody was focused and was so good. And the only thing that counted was going and being proficient at combat. And so to be in a unit like that, I thought I was going to get fired every day just because and there were plenty of officers that did, but there was nothing other than excellence that would be accepted, from your immediate supervisor, from those below you to up to the battalion command team. They demanded excellence and they demanded everything you had. And it was, I don't know if it was hard. It was just, it was difficult, but it wasn't hard. It was difficult. And I say the difference is hard is, I think, it feels laborious, where I truly felt it was an honor just to be a part of that organization and to be given the responsibility and to, all right, Lieutenant, now you got to keep up and you got to prove every single day that you belong here. Cause, oh, by the way, in a few weeks, we're going back to war and you better be up to snuff or else you're going to be gone. And so it was a foundational experience for me. I think probably even more so than my initial time prior in the 90s, just because it was so, there was nowhere to hide because you had to go and you had to perform.
Okay, so let's go back to that word terrified, Dave. When you go in there, you say that you're terrified that you're in charge of losing someone, of all the different things that you experience the first time you're in combat. Let's take that same word, put it into the Ranger Regiment, and I've got to almost believe that you feel terrified for something else. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not terrified for being in charge and all of those things you felt with the 10th Mountain. It's one looking like a fool and not being good enough to be there. Would you say that the word terrified changed to that?
I was definitely more focused on it for sure, because I came in, my counterparts, some of the other fire support officers, there's 3 in the battalion, and they had both done the deployment. They had great reputations. So yeah, I definitely wanted to keep up, because you talk about drinking from a fire hose. Being a fire support officer in the 10th Mountain, especially back then, was very, very different than the Ranger Regiment. Not better, but just very, very different. And, you're responsible for a lot more. You have a lot more assets under control, a lot more things as overseas, and you were going to go get into a fight. And so there was obviously I was there from 2005 to 2007 in Iraq at that point, and it was a highly kinetic environment at that point.
Well, and I would even take it a step further, and I want to use a comparison of college and being a pro athlete. When you're at the college level, you're good and you can be the best at what you are. Once you get to the Ranger Regiment, once you get to be a Green Beret, everybody's good at the job. Everyone is equally as good. It's a different kind of, I don't want to use the word stressor, but it's definitely a different kind of environment that you're working in.
Absolutely. And there are great people everywhere. And I served with phenomenal people in 10th Mountain and as well as in the Rangers. Anytime you have an additional hurdle that people have to go through, whether it's jump school, whether it's going through a selection process to get in the Ranger Regiment, you're just going to naturally have you're going to have a higher concentration of great people, I'll say, because like I said, there are great people everywhere. But you're exactly right. I mean, I was just trying to keep up and just learning and learning and learning. I remember sitting and studying the minimum safe distances for every single round that we would fire, had AC-130. How close can I actually bring in an AC-130? Firing a 105 with an HE round. What if it's a delay fuse? All of these things, and different types of hellfires, different angles of attack, all these different things. And I remember just sitting. We didn't have kids at that time, and I studied every single night. And so iron sharpens iron, and man, I was definitely getting the chance to not remain dull at all. And it was great. It really pushed me on a daily basis, starting at PT in the morning all the way to, overseas in combat, because again, there was no place that you could hide at that point. We were either training to go to war, or we were at war, or we were coming home, getting ready to start our training again. And it was very, very intense time. For sure.
How many times do you deploy with the Rangers?
2 more times.
Okay. Is that where you decide that it's time to go the Special Forces route?
No, I actually branch transferred back to the infantry at that point, and the Army allowed me to branch transfer, and I was in I think I was in the captain's course, or I was getting ready to, and a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, SF is taking out of your group waivers." I just put mine in. And so I was like, I hadn't really thought about that. And this was 2007 time frame. Everybody was going overseas and was working with host nation forces. So I went home and talked to my wife, and I said, well, if I'm going to go have to work with indigenous forces, I'd like to go work with the best people that do that, which is special forces. And she said, yeah, if that's what you want to do, I'll support you. And so I called the SF branch rep, and he said, hey, give me your social. And he pulled up my my officer record brief, and he goes, yeah, we'll take you. When do you want to go to selection? And so I said, well, I can go in January. And so he said, okay, send this guy an email, tell him you want to go to January. And that was it.
Let me take my wife on a 2-week vacation.
So I said, yeah. And so in January of 2008, that's where I found myself, was out at Camp McCall. And so I never actually officially applied to SF, which is kind of funny in retrospect. But yeah, I just did a phone call and then sent an email. So that was it. Wasn't a high bar at that point. We needed people.
What was the reason, though? You know, when you went over to the Rangers and you told them, I want to go to war with the Rangers. So you go, you get all your combat time with them. What was the reason you decided to rebranch and step away from that lifestyle?
It was a very, very hard decision. Extremely hard. I still remember it because I talked to my battalion commander on the way out, and he said, hey, you know, go command and then, you know, put your packet in to come back to the Rangers, because you have to continually reapply every time you come back, and officers have to leave and come back. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely, sir. In fact, I had been hired, or I'd been offered a job in my old battalion commander from 10th Mountain was taking a brigade in 4th ID. And he had written me a letter of recommendation for a branch transfer. And he said, hey, I will give you a company and you can have that company for a year and then deploy with them. At that point, I think there were 15-month deployments. He said, we're going to Afghanistan for 15 months. And then, and you can keep that company through the entire deployment. And so I was honored, and, and all of that was happening when my friend called me, and then SF came into the picture. So I was, but to leave the Ranger Regiment and know that you're going into Special Forces, that I wouldn't be back, was very, very difficult, because I love that organization to this day. I think it's just phenomenal. The guys that are there, and I mean, the people that are there are just incredible. It's such a professional organization, and they just go nonstop. I mean, you have people that my peers that either I came in with originally or that were there when I was younger. Some of these guys end up with over 20 combat rotations, and these are not easy combat rotations. I mean, many of them are highly, highly kinetic, and doing that 20, 25 times, doing it 10 times. I mean, it's amazing. And to be able to work with people like that is just incredible. So yeah, it was a very, very hard decision to leave that behind.
And I think you would agree too. Once you go over to Special Forces, it's a very not different kind of world, but it's a very different kind of mission. You said you wanted to go to war with the Rangers. When you go over to the regiment, you're going to war. That's what you're doing. Special Forces, as we talked about while I was down at Liberty with you, was there's a lot of host nation training. There is a lot of building up, quote unquote, the hearts and minds. It's a completely different mission. How do you adapt to that? Because you have shown over and over throughout your career, you're ready to be there in the thick of it. Now you're going to be doing something different. And as an officer, you're going to really be doing something different. You're going to be having that 30,000 foot view, as we talked about at Liberty.
Well, fortunately for me, I was assigned to 5th Group at the time, which had responsibility for Iraq. So there was plenty of fighting left to be done. And of course, Afghanistan was going off as well. So that part of it it wasn't a concern for me. I've actually, to this day, never done a JSET, a training mission deployment that was just training, which is SF's bread and butter, and still is in everywhere where that we're not at war. But for 5th Group at that time, I never did one. I just trained and deployed, surprise, back to Iraq again and again. So it wasn't much. It was definitely different, but it wasn't. It was something that I was used to at that point. But it was great. To your point about the overall SF mission, you're right. It is different. And I had done all these other things. At that point, I had three deployments, and it was. I wanted to try something new and to try something that was a little bit different. And I didn't know where I was going to go, but my first choices were 5th Group and 3rd Group, because when I went to the Q course, the cadre told me, and said, hey, if you want to fight, go to 5th and 3rd. And everybody fought, but in other groups that didn't have those primary areas of responsibility, some battalions were still, rightly so, were tasked with you guys are the Afghan battalion, you guys are the JSET battalion, so guys were continuing to go. So there were some people that were not deploying to combat at that point. But if you were in 5th or 3rd at that point, you were going, and that was it. And so that's what I was told by the cadre, and so that's what I prioritized on my list, and I got it. So they probably figured I couldn't do anything else, so they sent me back to Iraq. But yeah, it was great.
Does it ever get normal with all the deployments that you do, with all the different units that you deployed with? Does it ever, you go, all right, I got this now. I understand not only my mission, but the geopolitics of the area. I understand the entire picture now. I can see the full spectrum of everything.
I would never say that I understand everything, because I think the second that you think you do, you're setting yourself and your people up for failure. But I definitely, on my last trip, which was last year, I definitely felt, I commanded the Special Operations Task Force and through Iraq and Syria, and it was having the benefit of having spent so much time over there and understanding history. And obviously I wasn't there for all of it, but even over the last 20 years, but I had a significant amount of time in country and was very involved. Iraq has lived very, very large in our life for the last 20 years. So yes, you definitely, you have more knowledge, you have everything, but if you don't respect the task that you're executing, i.e. combat operations, then you're definitely setting yourself and your people up for failure. So you can't ever think that I got this, because if you do, like every time is different. I've been back to the same place when I commanded a force as a lieutenant colonel, and I went back to a spot where we were hit with a massive V-bid when I was a lieutenant, and I actually got a photo of it, and in the exact same spot. And it's a very different place. It's the same spot in the same city in the same neighborhood, but it's a very different time. The operational environment's different, and it was very, very different. And so I think you have to respect that, and people that have been doing this for long enough understand that nothing is ever the same. Yes, you have done other things, but if you think that having done that, you get to cut corners and now, like, I got this, then you probably won't have it for long, and bad things will probably happen. So I'm very, very aware of that, and don't ever want to have that attitude.
Well, and maybe I need to explain that question differently. What I mean by normalizing is, as you rotate and you start doing all these combat rotations, you would agree that's not a normal way of life. You can look at it in the law enforcement perspective, that people don't see what law enforcement goes through every day. But at a certain point, you just think like, yeah, that's my life. I see this. It's a normal thing. You see horrific things. You see great things. There's all these different things. But I think you would agree at some point, all of that becomes normal, not to the average person, but to you, where you go, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And yes, as far as it becoming normal, it definitely is at this point. And that's, honestly, I don't even like saying that, because it shouldn't be. Going to war should never be normal. Because it's not. It's decidedly unnormal. However, we've been engaged for so long in that region, and so it's like, okay, how is this part? And it's even more so for me. It's normal for my family, and that is not something that I'm happy about, but it just is, because that's all they've known, and is me deploying and whatnot. Obviously, we talk to my son and my daughter. It's very it's not the full details on stuff, but my son is an older teenager. Like, he's not dumb. He knows what goes on. And so, but yeah, the act itself, I think, of deploying and going into combat theaters and stuff like that, it's definitely far different than that first time that we talked about, stepping off the plane and driving into Baghdad the first time, when everything was new, everything, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the experience, the feeling, all of that, the unknown. Now you are familiar with the area. I could drive around parts of Baghdad to this day that I lived in as a lieutenant without needing a map, just because I know my way around that area so well. And so it feels much more, I'll never say at home, but it feels much more familiar, obviously, after having spent years and years and years there.
How many deployments do you have under your belt now?
12, 3 of which were prior to the war starting. So I actually did do a couple JSETs, and but just not with Special Forces prior to the war. So.
Okay, so with that, and you look at it, do you think, and where you're at right now is the reason that this question is so important to me to ask, do you think that there's ever a time that you go, it's time for me to step away and someone else to take that? Because I feel, knowing you and meeting you down there, that there's never really that time. I think that you, being the person that you are, always want to be in the middle of it. But do you think that there's ever a point where you go, I need to step away and let other people take the mantle?
It's a question that we all come to. I'm at the stage of my career where I'll actually get promoted soon, and the Army, I just competed at the for 06 Command, and so we'll find out here in the next month or two, how and where that worked out. And so my thoughts on it are, if I'm still enjoying it, my family is still doing well, and the Army sees me as, hey, we would like you to do this, then I feel an obligation to do that, because at this point I've got the experience. And so, my entire generation does, right? but I have experiences that I feel like I can contribute, I can help, and I can help those coming behind us. So those that they would put me in charge of leading. And they say that leading in the Army or in the military is that, you serve your people. And I really truly feel that way. I love the people that I work with, and being able to use my experiences for good, for, operationally, but also try to make their lives a little bit easier, and better when I have the opportunity. It's, I can't think of anything cooler to do, frankly. And, I graduated from Florida State with an international affairs degree, and I've been at war for the last 20 years. So it's been fun. I definitely can say I used my degree for sure, but I haven't been looking out at other things, and I'm just excited to be doing what I'm doing still. So it's a lot of fun.
And the reason I ask that is because of people that we've talked about on the show, talked about when I was at Liberty with you. You talk about people like Chuck Ritter, who's getting ready to step away. Sean Keane, who said it was time for him to do something different in life. And I think he ended up with 30 something years. But people, they think it's time to step away. With you and being where you're at, I feel like that's almost a perfect place for you to be, because you did go to war for almost your entire career, if not your entire career. And you have these guys that have never seen that before. To be able to look up to you, to emulate you, to learn from you, I think is like the greatest position that you can be in now, by getting that knowledge down. Because at some point we're going to go back into a rotation where those people haven't been around. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And, and I would talk to guys, and that pendulum is already swung. The folks that we have coming, obviously deployments are much less than they used to be. And so, like, my SF class, the officer course that I went through, I can't remember everybody, but I'm almost positive that every single person was a combat veteran. Now, the guys that are coming through, it's the exception by very much so. I mean, maybe 5 to 10% have actual combat experience, but that's a good thing. We shouldn't be at war for an entire generation, right? Like, go and win the war and come home. But we didn't have a lot of combat experience before 9/11. My battalion in 5th Group, 3rd Battalion, was one of elements of 3rd Battalion, were some of the first teams into Afghanistan. And there were a couple guys that had been to Desert Storm or Panama, that sort of thing, but not like they got in the future. And then they went into Afghanistan. In fact, the movie Horse Soldiers, or 12 Strong, was about one of my teams. I wasn't there at the time, but 595 that was in 3rd Battalion, 5th Group, which is what I commanded. And they went in, and them and the other teams that went in, without the majority of them having combat experience. And they were executing mounted cavalry charges against enemy armor on horseback, with host nation forces that they had just met, sometimes, a couple days prior. And because they were so well trained and they were so adaptable, and they were the right people that were well trained and then empowered to go do what they needed to do. So combat experience, I think, is very, very important. If you have it, great. If you learn from it, even better. But if you don't, it was all of our first time at some point. And I think the guys will rise to the occasion when the time comes, because at the end of the day, Americans are Americans, and we're always going to have those people that are willing to step into the breach and go do those hard things. And so that's the one thing that's been consistent throughout. I'll read a book from the Civil War to World War II to Vietnam, and then I can always pick out like a guy, and I'm like, I know a guy just like that. I've served with a guy just like that. At the end of the day, I think that Americans are willing to go out there and serve their country, and so I think we're always going to have that. I think we're always going to be ready. It's just a matter of how experienced and how well trained the force is before they go in the first time.
In all of your deployments that you've done, do you have, because I've heard some guys say it, do you have a favorite deployment where you thought like this was, I don't know if I'd say the pinnacle of your career, but where you look at it and you go, that was as weird as it sounds, once again, normalizing it, that was a great deployment?
I don't know if I have a favorite, because I have multiple that I look back on, and they were incredible for different reasons. I will say my first deployment in the Rangers was incredible because the team, it was very, very, things were not going well in Iraq. And so there was a lot of work to be done. It was in 2006 and Al Qaeda was really going strong and we were going after him. It was pretty relentless at that point and going out almost every single night. And to be a part of that was incredible. Fast forward a few trips later and in 2011, with my team in Iraq, the Iraqis, we had already announced that we were leaving at the end of 2011. And so the Iraqis didn't want to work with us. We were able to conduct numerous operations independently. And we did some really, really great stuff, some really, really great missions that my team and I had a phenomenal ODA and just super professionals. And we were able to do some really, really great stuff. And then my last couple trips, I commanded different task forces and to be a part of that and to have that, my last trip last year with my battalion, with Fifth Group was incredible to watch the team do the things that we've asked them to do in some very, very difficult circumstances at the edge of policy, in a lot of places and where they're the only Americans in a lot of locations. It's remarkable to see, back to my earlier point about we always will have those people that will go into the hardest places and do the hardest things and do it as well as they do. And so to be given the responsibility of commanding all of that was incredible for a whole host of different reasons. So not because I'm going into the door and going into the breach with my team, but rather facilitating other people doing great things and being able to command that and to serve with them in that capacity was incredible, just incredible.
And, I think we talked about at Liberty where at one point you're in charge of 18 ODAs at once. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I want to take that and I want to kind of start wrapping this conversation up by first asking you, looking back on your entire career, 27 years, enlisted, officer, big Army when you go to combat, Rangers, Special Forces, and then what you do now. How do you think you've changed as a person? And second, how do you think you've changed as a leader?
Oh, that's easy. I was a horrible leader when I was younger. I was atrocious, but hopefully I'm better now. But I've had the benefit of having served and I've been on the receiving end of phenomenal leadership throughout my career. As I mentioned earlier, people that I served with back in Savannah are senior enlisted all the way up as high as you can go. They're 4-star generals. I've got 2 of my platoon leaders are now general officers, both of which I have served with since just in the last few years. And so it's been phenomenal. So I have received such phenomenal leadership. Guys like General Votel was my battalion commander in Savannah, then Lieutenant Colonel Votel, and his boss was then Colonel McChrystal. I mean, what an incredible, incredible chain of command to be able to serve under and lead. And so having role models like that, and then the people that I've served with, the guy I mentioned earlier, Paul Volke in 10th Mountain, my company commander, just a phenomenal human being doing a very difficult task. So I've tried to take little bits and pieces of the people that I've served with, and there are too many great leaders to count or mention. And just tried, there's no shortage that I never encounter a situation where I don't have a good role model for. And so I've been very, very lucky with that. And then as far as I've changed as a person, I started off as an immature 19-year-old, punk, let's say it. And got into this very, very serious business, which became a lot more serious just a few short years later. And so I think it's I don't know how I've changed as a person, but I think I value things more than, and I've got my priorities are, I think, extremely clear and extremely and are very clear to me and are set right because I've lived just like all of us that have been gone. You learn what's really important and what do you need to live? Well, I lived for a year in my first deployment with 2 duffel bags, and so I don't need much to live. And so my family my friends, the experiences and providing a peaceful life for my family and whatnot. Like that's what's really important to me. I'm not motivated by financial gain or anything like that. Like we're fine. The Army treats us great, but I think having crystal clear priorities and knowing what's really important, at least to you, is a gift that that I hope everybody is able to receive at some point, because once you are clear-eyed on what's important and then you stop chasing other things and I think you can enjoy life a little bit more. And so I definitely try to live and enjoy in my life every day that I've been blessed to still be here.
You think you've lost pieces of yourself at all along the way?
I don't see how you couldn't. Anybody that goes out and serves their country like that and serves in a time of war, I think that's naturally going to. I think that's naturally going to happen, for sure.
So let me ask you, if you know that and you know everyone around you that has does that, how do we fix that problem? How do we get those pieces back at the end?
Well, I'll caveat that by saying I've also built up other areas. So I came back around. I was raised in a church, but I didn't go to church for over a decade because I just for various reasons. But once my son was born, I came back around and I was always faithful, but I didn't spend a lot of time going to, like, I didn't set foot into a church for over a decade. But now it's a very important part of our lives now, which is great. I enjoy that part. I've also, like I said, I'm very clear about where my life is and what's important to me. And so that's a gift. So, well, I'd be hard pressed to tell you, like, this is what I've lost, but I can tell you things that I've gained, resilience and experience and true happiness and joy by, I try not to ever take my family and the things that I have for granted. And that is a wonderful gift, because when you don't have it or you almost lose it all, it tends to sharpen the mind and sharpen your focus. So, but to your question, I think the biggest thing that we can do is a couple things. I think generating an understanding for what people go through and what they do, and I'm not just talking about military combat veterans. I know you were a police officer and the things that police and first responders and all this, I mean, that is an everyday thing, depending on especially where they're at and what they do. But, they can see as much or more than somebody at war over their career. That is something that I think understanding and support from our society as a whole, I think, is very important. And, our generation is very lucky as opposed to our parents' generation that came back during Vietnam, where they didn't have that societal understanding. And while people maybe they don't understand, they can be empathetic to the things that people do. And I think just having a grateful nation and grateful community that kind of wraps their arms around their warriors when they come home, I think that goes a long way towards healing, because then at least for me, that people at least appreciate the sacrifices that those that made, and not just the ones that come home, but especially those people that don't come home, because there is no greater sacrifice than laying down your life for your country. So, I mean, I'm lucky. You and I are getting to sit here and have a conversation, right? But there are thousands and thousands of families that cannot do that. And for every day, it's something they deal with every day. Where I'm going to go later tonight, I'm going to tuck my daughter in and read a story and do all those things that I'm very grateful to get to do. So,
I guess coming into the final questions, is there anything about your career, and I can't imagine there is, but is there anything that you would do differently? You would go a different route. You would say a different thing. Is there anything that you look back on and go, I wish I could change that part of my career?
I've made mistakes just like everybody, but I've learned from them. But I wouldn't, as far as parts of my career, there's not a thing. I have, as much as I wanted to leave 10th Mountain and was very disappointed, when I first got there to not go, that having that foundational experience, it ended up being extremely good for me. And it was, I gained a lot of experience. And so, yeah, as far as, would I change anything about the trajectory or or any part of it? And absolutely not. I've I've been more blessed than I deserve to be, and I'm loving every minute of it.
I'm going to give you one more definition to end this entire conversation. Commitment. What does it mean to you?
I think commitment is putting something else ahead of your own wants and desires. You know, you do that when you marry somebody. If you're doing it right, you commit to you as a union. Same thing with, you know, serving in the military. When you sign on that dotted line, you may not realize it, but you are committing to something that can be very, very difficult. And you know, just like a good marriage, right? It's not all rainbows and sunshine. But in the end, it's worth it. And I think that, you know, when you put something else ahead of your own wants and desires, it is, you know, and you value that and are willing to take a back seat, then I think that's where true satisfaction comes in, is when you actually really commit to something. And I know that I found that both personally and professionally, and hope it keeps going.
Well, we've talked about it a little bit. What's next for you?
Well, I'll finish up command this next summer, and then by that point I will know if and where I will command as a colonel. I get promoted here soon, and which, man, never saw that one coming. But it's sometimes it's really weird to look down and, you know, I still feel like a young ranger. I mean, not when I get out of bed, of course, and it takes a few minutes to get everything going, but I got a few more miles on me now. You know, it's like I said, I didn't even want to be an officer, and now the fact that, you know, now that I'm about to be a colonel, it's strange. It's a little strange, but you know, we're all just making it up as we go along, and I'm having a blast. So, you know, wherever the Army sees fit, if they see fit to give me another command, great. And then you know, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So I'm just excited to still be here and to, you know, make Green Berets right now, and you know, trying to pass on some of the stuff that we talked about before. So to that next generation coming in. So yeah, just having fun.
Where can people find you? And we're talking social media links, LinkedIn, wherever that may be. If they have some more questions for you or just want to learn a little bit more about you, where can they find you?
Not too many places, but you know, you and I, LinkedIn is the one place where I go, and you know, I've had people ask me. I got into a rhythm of, you know, I post like one time a week, and I started doing that because I've been able to have some really, really good conversations. Excuse me, and with folks, and I think it's important for folks that have been doing this for a while to demonstrate some of the benefits of being in the Army. And so if my story, you know, if my story can help somebody that's trying to decide like, hey, I'd like to go, you know, maybe I'll try to give this a shot. It's something that I talk about, and you know, and if that helps people, and you know, we need recruiting is always an issue. I'm not a recruiter, but if my story helps somebody decide that they want to serve, then it's all worth it. So yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. Actually, it's the only place. So you've got me there. If anybody wants to reach out.
Well, guys, that's going to be it for this week. You know where you can find Dave. Let's talk about where you can find me. As always, you can find me on Instagram at the DTD_podcast. You can find me on Facebook at the DTD podcast, and you can find me on YouTube, where all these conversations, they're in physical video form. Now, if you want a one-stop shop, it's going to be dtdpodcast.net. It's got audio, video. Dave's got pictures up there. He's got a bio up there, and he's got the link on LinkedIn where you can find him. So go there. Make sure you see everything that we're doing, everyone that we've talked to before. That's your one-stop shop, dtdpodcast.net. Don't forget, go to see the guys that make this show happen. Mac over at maxbelts.com. And if you do Trident Coffee at tridentcoffee.com, it's DTD15. We'll get you 15% off your order. And of course, check out my buddy down at Hatchet Brewing at hatchetbrewing.com. My buddy Greg over there is doing great things. Dave knows him. And guys, thank you so much for being who you are, listening to the show. Always remember, be a friend, tell a friend, share, like, subscribe, do all those things. That's going to be it for this week. That's Dave. I'm DJ. This has been the show. We'll catch you guys on the next one. See you later.